Hello to all. Here today in the Tier 7 Japanese cruiser, the Myoko. I'm in the ARP Myoko variant, available recently through a renewal of the ARP campaign, and she is the final prize of the free-to-play portion of those said campaigns, and as such I thought I would show her off. Now the ARP Myoko is identical to the Tech Tree Tier 7 Japanese cruiser Myoko when she's fully upgraded. And the Myoko has long been one of the more powerful of the Tier 7 cruisers. And as a Japanese cruiser, and the original Tier 7, she is, of course, a kind of workhorse veteran. She's always been a rather good cruiser, with certainly she has her limitations, but over the years she has seen her fair share of buffs, such as a turret traverse buff and also the IGN 203mm armed cruiser dispersion upgrade to destroyer dispersion, which has kind of evened out her power level. Anyhow, as a Tier 7 cruiser, she comes in quite heftily, actually, at 39,200 HP. Very tanky. She has the typical Tier 7 cruiser armor scheme with 25mm extremities, but she is notable for having a fairly thick, I believe it's 30 or maybe even 33mm armor deck, so she's actually very well armored for her tier. The midsection is very resistant to AP shells, even battleship AP shells. However, in exchange she has a raised above water citadel that is very easy to hit when you show broadside. And her gun angles, as you can see, are rather poor. You can see at a decent angle I can only really bring 3 rifles to bear, and to get all 10 rifles or all 5 turrets to bear I have to show quite a bit of broadside. Now coming after the Alba, the Myoko is a substantial upgrade. You go from the 3 twin turrets of the Alba at Tier 6 to 5 twin turrets on the Myoko. These are 203mm turrets, ranged in a staggered ABCXY, I guess you could say, layout, with 3 turrets forward and 2 turrets to the rear. She has a good range at 15.6, the same as the Mogami when fully upgraded, as well as the Arago. So this is about it in terms of what you're getting for range until you get to the Zao. She has standard IGN cruiser consumable layout for mid-tier cruisers, so that's just damage control, hydroacoustic or defensive fire, and access to a fighter plane. Once you get to the Ibuki at Tier 9, you get access to that spotter plane, but at Tier 7 you don't yet have that. You can see the rearbird angles are similarly not that great. I can only bring 2 rifles to bear at a good angle, and if I give a little bit more broadside, I can bring 3 rifles to bear. As a Japanese heavy cruiser, she does have good speed, reaching, I believe it's about 34.5 knots. So she is quite fast in a straight line. She has a pair of torpedo tubes on each side. They're triple tubes, so that's 6 tubes per side. They have a range of 10 kilometers, and they do substantial damage at 17,000. So these are pretty much identical to the torpedoes that you find on the Tier 7 destroyers Shiratsu and Akatsuki. Now this game's going fairly slowly, in spite of it being domination. There's a single DD per side. My Mahan was briefly spotted out by the enemy Lexington. In the meantime, the Leningrad's kind of up there, so this game's being played very slowly because there's not too much in the ways of scouting information. I forgot to mention, I am on Northern Lights. The mode is Domination, and we are middle tier. We're in 6 to 8 matchmaking, I believe. Yes, 6 to 8, so fairly good spot. Now we didn't find anything there. I was just going to cruise up to B and support my destroyer, but doesn't seem to be too much opposition there. Going to use my torpedo tubes that I just mentioned. Mounted rearward. Note that they're somewhat inferior to the torpedo tube angles found on the Alba. They kind of just get increasingly narrow as you move up the tiers. But compared to the Alba's single quadruple tube per side, the twin The twin triples are a substantial upgrade. Getting attacked here, the Myoko actually has a decent anti-aircraft speed. However, it's not quite as reinforced as you might like. Trying to squeeze some shots over the mountain range, but you can see at the King George V, but you can see my arcs are quite flat. Giving a fair bit of broadside, and I am spotted, so vulnerable here. Trying to squeeze off some shots. Angling in to dodge that AP. Now the King George V has 354mm rifles, or 14-inch, which means with my 25mm bow, I can actually bounce the shell, as you can see, to expose a huge amount of broadside in order to bring my rifle spare, taking some HE fire from the Bajoni. But I should be able to dodge out quite easily. Again, there's the AP, so I'm just going to angle my Myoko. Thankfully, I do have 25mm plate versus his 14-inch shells, and as you saw there, I'm easily able to bounce his 14-inch armor piercing. Got a fire, Japanese 203mm rifles, and Japanese HE in general. Very competent HE armament. Re-angle here, KGV managed to squeeze a salvo off. He does manage to land a shell into my superstructure, looks like, so he did get some damage, but I'm able to mitigate much of the damage that I received just by angling. Myoko, as I mentioned earlier, very, very tanky. Now on the other side, my team is folding, so I would like to get something done here. The problem is these two battleships are pushing very slowly, and even though I don't have a... or even though I can bounce much of the AP fired, the Myoko, even though she's tanky, is still a cruiser, so pushing a battleship is not exactly a behavior or activity I guess I would recommend. KGV spotted by my KGV. So I'm going to open up. You can see the shell arcs are reasonable. Not quite American, but not Russian railgun shells. Bit underlead there. Taking some fire from something. Maybe the KGV fired and I wasn't paying attention. Something just shuddered against me. Again, lighting a fire with those 203s. There's another fire in this midsection. Doesn't look like this guy's running fire prevention. But, as you can see, I'm showing a fair amount of broadside. But, thanks to the excellent rudder shift of Japanese cruisers, I'm fairly safe at this point. He's burning down. Just comfortably shooting at him. There's an Atlanta on the corner and the Bajoni there, so I do want to deal with that Atlanta before I proceed. Oh, he's firing high explosive, so I'm going to slow down to 3/4 speed and jam hard in on the rudder. You can see the rudder ship quickly tuning in to bring me to bear. Now that Atlanta has 27mm of penetration with FHE, however he has 16mm extremities, kind of destroyer armor, which means my 203s actually punch him right through the nose. So as soon as I see him, I should be able to get some substantial damage onto him. In the distance you see him the Mogami firing. He's outside of my range, so I'm outside of his range, trying to get some vision onto the Atlanta, but without the help of spotting from a destroyer, I'm unable to find the angle. Finally spotted, and there's the Atlanta. Seemed quite broadside, nothing special about Japanese AP, Myoko is no exception, but fully broadside. Hopefully I'll be able to get some citadels. You see there, the AP is quite serviceable. The Mogami is also fairly broadside, but while this guy is sitting here, I'm going to try and finish him off. The 13-second reload is a slight downgrade from the Alba's 10 seconds. Oh, just overpens, unfortunate. And I'm going to disengage myself from these two HE threats. Can't push in, so I'm just going to move across the map and try and engage these two, or those three battleships. There's a North Carolina and a Sinop. Both those have 16-inch guns, so 406s, so they do overmatch my 25mm bow. But as long as I stay angled, should be fine. Just going to start on the Duke of York, the KGV's sister, similarly covered in 25mm armor. We are behind, you'll note, but hopefully with the destruction of these battleships on that corner, via torpedo in that case, we'll be able to even the odds. Moving on to the Sinop. Now at 13-second reload, you are slightly better than the Mogami, which I believe... Actually no, you're identical to the Mogami, but you're inferior to the Alba, and you're better than the Atago/Takao class with their 16-second reload, which gives you the best stock reload, I believe, of the 203s, kind of matched with the Mogami and Ibuki that come after. I'm fairly broadside, so if the North Carolina shoots at me, expect me to take a large amount of damage. Checking speed with my torpedo tubes, Sinop dispatches my destroyer. You can see his middle deck of 38mm shattering much of my shells, but even at maximum range, I am able to land most of my shells. Remember, the torpedoes are a supplementary weapon, not your primary weapon. That is, of course, the excellent 203mm rifles of the Japanese cruisers. So, don't mess around with the torpedo tubes too much. Showing broadside in order to bring my rifles to bear. You see some of my rifles briefly go offline. This is of course because the Myoko, like all Japanese heavies, has fairly sluggish turret traverse. Angling in, the North Carolina did shoot at me. His shells fall short. He repaired my fire. My team is still losing, you'll note. So I have some work ahead of me. Oh, he did not repair my fire, I just couldn't see it. Or, yeah, he's still burning. You can see my damage ticking quite slowly. Sinop completely avoided my torpedoes, he's reversing. I'm gonna give him a salvo since the North Carolina is already burning. Oh, AP, not angled at all, so hopefully they don't touch me. Here's his last gun. Fire with the 3 available rifles that are 3 available turrets that can be fired while you are angled. His fire is out now. Just the classic kiting Japanese cruiser gameplay. Relight that fire. Note that the Sinop is dark but still there, so don't forget about him. I'm giving him a fair amount of broadside, but focusing on the North Carolina that I can't see. He's on fire again, so let's try and distribute our damage. Fairly dangerous to attack the Sinop here. He's actually kind of holding my broadside whenever I harass the North Carolina. But he's burning, the looks of it, so I'm gonna assume, or hope actually, that he dies. Zara does in fact dispatch him, slightly evening the odds. York is almost in range. I am actually gonna, since the Sinop doesn't appear to be interested in shooting at me, I'm gonna take a small risk and deal with this York for my Lexington so he can help me out. He's turning in. You can see even at range, because of the destroyer dispersion of these Japanese rifles, I am able to get kind of pinpoint accuracy even at the edge of my range. This is a key trait of Japanese heavies, starting with the Furutaka. I fired mostly HE in this scenario. Someone's looking at me. I'm hoping it's the York, and indeed it looks like the York, but having dispatched my allies, you can see the priority target ticking up to 3. So now I need to start angling against this Sinop. Now if he doesn't fire, I'm not going to be able to do much to him. I still have firing bloom. It's down to me and my carrier and this Zara. Kind of need them to fire at me. There we go. New Mexico opens up. He has only 350s. And he has kind of bad dispersion. So his sigma value of 1.5 is not exactly great. Double fire on my first salvo, stay angled. Dodge most of the shells anyway. He repair parties. So at this point, I'm going to re-engage him. Sinop looks like he's disengaged from me because I slid out of range due to the New Mexico's slow speed. I am completely disengaged because I was undetected. New Mexico similarly falls into stealth inside my cap, but he does fire, which gives him bloom, stagger my rifles off, and then slide back into a more aggressive angle. Sinop also looking at me, but not much I can do about that. Every time I fire at the New Mexico, I am going to be giving broadside to that Sinop, so that's the person on the minimap that I'm keeping an eye on. Okay, he lights up, so he just fired. Drop down to 3/4 speed to tighten my turn radius and angle. Now he does go for master my bow. You can see here, you can see the shells that rake my stern, able to pen me. But at least he has a rather slow reload. I'm gonna use this time to finish my turn. can see as I give broadside to New Mexico, even though I auto-bounce, I immediately eat a citadel. Took a big chunk there, but it's worth it in order to get my turn off against the Synop while he was reloading. Not an ideal circumstance here. One of his shells does overmatch me through the stern, but now kiting away, the Myoko is much more comfortable to deal with. Oh. And you can see me set my third fire onto the New Mexico. He should burn out, theoretically. But he does manage to catch me, just slightly not angled enough, and as a result, I do get dispatched. But nevertheless, a nice 132,000 damage game. Not the hardest matchmaking, but my team kind of did, shall we say, shit the bed. There's my last kill to get my third kill. 16 defended ribbons and 11 fires is a decent acquittal, and you can see I got an arsonist from that triple fire on the New Mexico, but this game is going to sadly end in a loss. In the meantime, I'm going to exit the port while we wait for the Ashigara, since I do have a regular Myoko in port. So I can use her to discuss the armor scheme. So I was using my Yamamoto, but we're going to jump over to my regular Myoko, which I've been keeping up until now, just to look at the armor. So, Myoko is an exceptionally tanky tier 7 cruiser. Here she is. You can see she's fairly large, quite a bit larger than some of the other tier 7s, such as the Helena or Atlanta, for example. Looks like my team just lost. But I'm going to stay here. So as you can see, okay, I was lying about the 25mm extremity. It's actually just 16, which explains a lot. Basically, that explains why the New Mexico was able to pen me through the stern. So 16 is fairly overmatchable. It's not quite the 13 of the Fiji, but 16s do mean, if I'm not mistaken, that you're overmatched by basically anything bigger than 203mm rifles. So anything like a Scharnhorst or a Grauspee and anything with bigger guns will overmatch you, but this is just enough to bounce 203. So any kind of battleship shells will overmatch your stern and bow. You can see the stern is fairly extensive. However, once you move in beyond the stern, first note your 25mm side belt. That's the upper side is 25, so that bounces 350 as I mentioned, but still gets overmatched by anything with 380s or larger, so that's 15-inch guns. And then notably, she has this 32mm central deck plate, which basically covers her whole ship. Now note that above that 32mm deck armor, you have this 13mm torpedo deck, so you still will eat pen damage from cruisers if they hit you in this torpedo deck. But below it is this 32mm deck, and this 32mm deck will bounce shells of up to 406mm caliber, which is basically every ship inside your matchmaking bracket except for the Georgia with her 457s. And the Musashi at tier 9 with her 460s. Other than that, basically all battleship shells you can bounce on your upper deck. This makes her substantially tankier than pretty much all other tier 7 cruisers, and even if you look at the Mogami, which comes after her, the Mogami is actually more thinly armored, only has 25mm deck armor. This is due to a quirk of the Myoko originally was the tier 8 cruiser in the tech tree, and the Mogami was originally the tier 7, but Mogami at tier 7 was quite disgusting, so they switched it around a little bit. But as a result, when the Myoko got moved down to tier 7 from tier 8, she got to keep her 32mm middle deck. Now if I strip away the torpedo bulge, you'll note the main belt of 102mm. Now 102 is not particularly impressive. It's a fairly average belt, about the same as the Shores, in fact, which is known for being quite squishy. And as a result, if you're giving any amount of broadside, and you do have to give a large amount of broadside in order to shoot all of your guns, battleship shells and even cruiser shells will easily punch through and hit your citadel. So if I strip away the extremities, we'll show off the citadel armor. Let me strip away the bow as well. So this is the Myoko Citadel. As I mentioned, it's raised above the waterline. It's waterline-ish underneath the turrets, but in the midsection, it's extremely raised and very accessible. In terms of citadel plate, it uses the actual side plate of the belt, but the upper citadel is 35, so you can auto-bounce some shells if they penetrate through. 35 again, and 76. So the citadel itself is well armored, but even these relatively large numbers are not enough to resist heavy cruiser shells or battleship shells. If you don't angle, you see those flat faces, so it's easy to catch shells. So in general, Myoko is exceptionally tanky when angled because you can catch shells on your 32mm middle deck. But if you give broadside for even a brief moment, you are liable to eat easy citadels. Captain build-wise, this is my Myoko captain. So this is what I was running when I was grinding the Myoko. However, on the ARP Myoko that I was running my Yamamoto, and this is more of a finalized build. This is a Zhao captain, you'll note. So on a Myoko, I would run the identical build, except instead of taking Superintendent, I would put the points into Demolition Expert. So first, take Priority Target. And then you want your Expert Marksman. The Myoko has extremely sluggish turrets. Then for your third point, as I mentioned, into Demolition Expert, and then Concealment Expert, and that's your basic 10-point I-Chan Captain build. After that, I'd probably go up for Adrenaline Rush. That's 12 points, and then at 13 points, I would go for Expert Loader. From there, your build's pretty flexible. You have 6 points left, so in this case, I opted for Last Stand and Radio Location. The Myoko, as a Japanese cruiser, does kite away fairly often, so as a result, you're exposing your rudder to a lot of enemy fire. So you'll lose rudder quite frequently if you take heavy HE fire from enemy cruisers or, say, British battleships, so Last Stand is very useful. And then Radio Location is a good tool for locating pesky enemy destroyers, because as a Japanese cruiser with no radar, you do have some trouble in terms of isolating targets, so this does help. There are some other variants of builds you can go for. You can go for, say, Vigilance plus Preventative Maintenance instead of Radio Location with those points. Or you can not take Last Stand and go for probably Jack of all trades. But in general, you just need your 10 points, and then Adrenaline Rush and Expert Loader, so 13 for the full finished-ish build. But the Myoko is not particularly picky about Captain's skills, which is another trait that makes Japanese cruisers good for a newer player with less well-trained captains. You can see here, the ARP Myoko is kind of purple, not my favorite color scheme, but it's not overly flashy. Anyhow, we'll head into a second match just to kind of try to score a win, but win or lose, this is going to be probably just the second game and final game of this short Myoko commentary. She's a workhorse cruiser, and she is the first representation of the Japanese heavies. In the line, moving on from the Alba, you move to the 10-gun setup of the Myoko, which you end up using for both the Mogami and the Ibuki, particularly if you choose to use the 203mm guns on the Mogami that comes after the Myoko instead of the 155s. So if you can get a taste of success with the Myoko, you should be able to succeed with the Mogami, Ibuki, and the Zhao onward. So it's a good measure of how comfortable you're going to be. Enemy team does have an RNG division, and I have, well, apparently no one, so I would say, just based on matchmaking, I'm probably unfavored to win. You can see that purple does leave a nice blue shadow in the water. Okay, I forgot to mention that we're in 7 to 9 matchmaking, so we have bottom tier. So things could get quite complicated. On Crash Zone Alpha, no carrier this time. Domination, never Friesland. Nope, we do have to be careful. The Myoko is not quite as stealthy as some of the Japanese cruisers that come after her, as you can see with my 11.5 kilometer concealment. It's good, but you can't stealth torpedo, unlike the Myoko. Or unlike the Mogami, which comes after with her 10 kilometer torpedoes, and I believe it's 9.5 kilometer detection. Or the Atago, the premium, which has 10 kilometer torpedoes and a 9.3 kilometer detection. Or even the Zhao, with her 9.9 kilometer detection and 12 km torpedoes. But still fairly stealthy. Stealthy enough to operate quite independently. Starting off, I'm just going to shadow this Friesland. Hopefully he doesn't die too quickly, because I do need him to provide spotting information on this cap control circle. No, I'm fairly broadside. My RPF kind of tells me where the entry point of the destroyer is. Just gonna ping that square. Neptune just about to slide into my range. Now, in a top tier match or a mid tier match, my range at 15.6 is quite adequate, but when bottom tier on a larger map such as Crash Zone Alpha, you do start to feel the limitations of that Japanese range, which is why kind of popping in and out of stealth is very important. The Myoko has to get quite close and show quite a bit of broadside, so okay. I'm in an awkward spot. You can see I can't turn out and away, so I must turn in, which is obviously quite poor for my chances. Sovietsky Soyuz firing on me. I expect the Jean Bar to fire on me as well. Able to dodge the first salvo by just slowing down and turning slightly in. But now, okay. Was able to complete my turn before the Jean Bar decided to fire at me. So thankfully, because I ducked behind cover, was able to fall into detection, because I have to turn extremely broadside to make this turn. Enemy destroyer gets pushed out of the cap, or leaves the cap. He's right up here now. I should be detected crossing here. As expected, I am. RPF tells me exactly where. I'm slowing down. I kind of want to torp, but at the same time the Friesland is there, so he's moving across the cap. You can see the information given to me by my RPF. It's an Akazuki. 10km torpedoes, he's at 8.8, so I do have to dodge these. Okay, I did not bring my engine up to power, so I would have taken those torpedoes more than likely if they had range. So just do note that that was going to be an unsuccessful torpedo beat. An Akazuki with 6.2 detection versus a Friesland at 6.4, but he chooses to smoke up. So hopefully my Friesland can smoke him out with his hydro. Kind of turning very slowly. The Friesland does light him up, but because of the way I turned in order to dodge torpedoes, I'm not able to fire. I'm behind cover. I'm gonna have to pass this rock, which is again in my way, which is why this position is extremely dangerous. I'm gonna decline to hold my fire because I'm not angled. Let's see if I can use that destroyer dispersion to get a good chunk out of that Akazuki. Now as I fire, I do have to be immediately aware of that Jean Bar, who can easily kind of smash through my armor. Oh, targeted by one. I'm completely broadside. Okay, it's not the Jean Bar, whatever it is, which is a start. It could be the Sovietsky Soyuz. I'm at the edge of his range. You can see those Sovietsky Soyuz 16-inch shells. Only my middle deck bounces those, remember, so you have to be careful. Survive the salvo. I'm gonna put some fire onto this reversing Jean Bar. As a French battleship, my 203s pretty much penetrate him everywhere, except for the turrets, so those two shatters are shells onto the turret. He's under heavy fire. Gonna help my team kind of finish him off. Somehow we've gotten an early destroyer lead, so that's a good start considering the RNG division on an enemy team who is, at the very least they are bottom tier, but they did bring a Belfast, so not exactly my idea of fun. DD complaining about being abandoned by his team, but he probably just overpushed to be realistic, considering where he died. Gonna borrow this Neptune smoke. More than happy to just park here for a little bit. There's a Neptune to shoot at after this Jean Bar goes down. Kinda collecting what damage I can very cautiously in this bottom tier match. Katsuki over there, and there's a Neptune as well. Switching to armor piercing speculatively. Let's see if I can get a shot onto the Neptune. Unfortunately, looks like I'm going to pass through the gap before I can take a shot. Gonna take a half blind shot there. So I didn't have a really good angle on the Neptune, and I wasn't able to fire all my rifles, but we did squeeze out an extra 2k. Switch back to high explosive now. The only reason I loaded AP was for the Neptune, and the Neptune does get dispatched. So, we're trading decently up, but do note that we are going to be down on caps. And my team down here, including this top tier Jean Bar, is likely to be dispatched, so we do want to motor forward. Like all Japanese cruisers, you want to stay mobile, stay on the move. Not really much of an island hider. I am spotted, which tells me that the Akatsuki is outside of concealment, or outside of his smoke. And within my spotting radius. No one can really shoot me here though, so I'm feeling fairly safe. Garisia's not in range. I am on the edge of his torpedo range. I mean, Massachusetts could potentially shoot me, but I'm not a great target. I'm targeted by one, which tells me I'm inside his Akatsuki's gun range as well. Okay, so 10 kilometers. I don't have hydroacoustic note because I choose to run defensive fire. I'm gonna slow down here. Try and dodge any potential torps which are led by a nose. Miss my salvo on the Akatsuki, but he's gonna stay spotted due to his 6.4 kilometer detection. Which should allow me to take some pot shots at him. Note that tight dispersion that I was mentioning earlier in the other game. Oh, my shells are a bit short, however. Let's try one more time. Oh, no such luck. This has been kind of a steamroll of game. That Jean Bart that I said would die, well, he's not dead, let's just say. He's running down that RNG division in the tier 7s. Finally have something in range for me. You can see a brief delay on my shells. This is of course because my turret traverse was fighting, or I was fighting against my turret traverse, which is very sluggish. So as a result, I was trying to fire before my turrets were fully turned, even though they kind of looked like they were, thanks to the Japanese slow turrets. Gonna be broadside here to me, so switch to armor piercing. British heavies have an extremely raised citadel. Again, my AP is not special, but it's perfectly fine. Oh, Belfast coming up. I was going to switch to HE, but with a broadside Belfast in front of me. Belfast, just like her heavy counterparts, does have thin armor, and as a tier 7, she has 13mm extremities, just like the Fiji, which means I punch right through the rear and the stern, or the bow and stern. So if you follow those AP shells, note how they just punch right through, even though he's fairly angled against me. Pretty low damage game, which is disappointing, but this is kind of more a factor of the current state of World of Warships, where there's many steamrolls in terms of games. An unfortunate reality. He's turning in based on my RPF. Belfast is smoking, and he's kind of right where the Surrey is. He should be in torpedo range, so I'm gonna give him the tubes, and I'm gonna move in. The Belfast doesn't have torpedoes. Using the Belfast smoke against him to get a shot from concealment out at this Surrey. Still have the AP loaded, however, so unable to get the kill. That's quite alright, we'll get another chance. And at this point I'm going to nose in towards that Belfast. He got his heel off, and I got 5 overbends. But someone is going to dispatch him. My torpedoes are going to miss. I can tell the Belfast reversed inside his smoke. Garisia popping his German hydro. Oh, he moved forward again. I'm just waiting at this point. Belfast is the last one. His smoke should be about mostly over at this point. I fired 4 times. His smoke lasts about 90 seconds. He's radaring to get an idea of what's in the area, but I'm not concerned at all. He has a Richelieu to deal with, and he's fully broadside to me. Which means, with a quick AP salvo, I can finish him off. Rather inauspicious bottom tier game, but what can you do? You play cautiously because you're bottom tier, and then nothing happens. So this time, unlike the 120,000 game before, only 32,000 damage. Most of my damage coming from that last Belfast kill. As you can see, team score wise, based on the fact that I really didn't get to do anything because I played so far back because I was afraid we were going to have an even game. I was unable to score very highly. This is what happens when you hang too far back, but I mean, how was I to know we were going to trade 2 ships for 12? In this case of this game, I did get most of my damage from my AP. You'll note that just based on the knowledge that I can punch that tier 7 Belfast through the nose and stern, I ended up firing a lot of AP at him, but typically you will fire mostly HE as you saw in the first game of the Myoko. So yeah, one good game that we lost, and one bad game that we won. Yes, but such is the fate of World of Warships. Anyhow, the Myoko is a great tier 7 cruiser and a great prize that you can earn for free during the current campaign, so I highly encourage you to try and complete the ARP campaign. In addition to the Myoko, you will earn along the way 4 copies of the Congo, which is an excellent tier 5 Japanese battleship. You don't need 4 copies of her, she's not that excellent, but the point is to get to the Myoko, which is the real prize, and an excellent tier 7 cruiser. So, I hope this was a helpful review. The Myoko is a very, very old ship at this point, so there probably isn't too much current content on her, but I have to say, even in the current state of World of Warships, she remains a powerful tier 7, especially in the hands of an experienced player. With that said, I'll catch you all later, and I hope you enjoyed. Cheers!